Hello, everybody. This is MonteCristo with another Overwatch League team preview. Joining me is Hexagrams, noted Overwatch analyst, and we are going to be discussing the Los Angeles Valiant. So, for those of you who are new to the Overwatch scene, this is a team that is owned by the team Immortals, formerly of League of Legends, sadly not of League of Legends anymore. Also, sort of has half a Counter-Strike team right now. They're in an interesting spot, but they're in a really good spot for Overwatch. This is an interesting roster because they've had such high highs and low lows. They went under the name Immortals previously in Contenders Season 0 and Season 1. Why don't you describe their rather perplexing performance over those two seasons, Hex?
Well, season 0, they absolutely dominated. We're very good. Added a couple Koreans late in the season, and that was just the icing on the cake. No one could even touch them in season 0. Season 1 got a little more interesting. I guess they're trying to fill out some roles, and I mean, they just fell apart. They just looked bad across the board. I think Verbo got pulled for shot calling and then put back in. They didn't know what to do with Grim, which I think is still a question that we should address later on here. And they just looked very odd, but a big influx of talents. So I actually have pretty high expectations for this Valiant squad.
Yeah, I think that they made some good moves. So, to describe their play style briefly, so when they came into Contender Season 0, this was a time when they were playing in NA, when a lot of the really good NA rosters, by that would mean teams like Rogue and Envy, were off competing in Korea. So they had an easier time, and they did end up finishing at the top of the Season 0 after adding a Korean player named Fate and a Korean player named Kareev. But they played basically they just played a pure dive style. Tracer, Genji, Winston, not Zenyatta, not a lot of variation in their compositions, and they mastered it, and they just executed it very well over and over and over again. Now, come Contender Season 1, first off, they have significantly more challenging opponents, but the meta game has also changed where there's a lot more diversity, not just having that dive, and they never really seemed to evolve with it. They got decoded. It was very transparent how this team was going to come out, how they were initiating with Fate on the Winston, and it seemed like a lot of teams just downloaded them and countered it very well.
Yeah, and also even towards the tail end or of season 0, when they were struggled with a couple matches, I always thought if you could shut down Grim and just dive him, he never really responded well to that pressure. And Grim Reality is one of my favorite players. We'll talk a little bit about him when we go down, but it was that teams were starting to figure out, like, okay, let's just let Agilities come in and do whatever he's going to do, and we'll try to stop that. But if we can shut down the other end, like it was they started figuring out counter diving Immortals was the best thing to do, and some teams were working on that. So yeah, they definitely have to diversify strategies. We know how good a lot of these players are on this team, but it's going to be a matter of coaching and strategy and cohesion going forward. And they've added some pieces. I have some questions about the pieces as we go forward, but the things I don't question is, Unko getting brought in, and Soon, who were two of the best pieces of the best Western team forever in Rogue. So like I said, I've said time and again, when you look at this roster, it's like, well, yes, they had players to play those positions, but you just get them. I mean, yeah. It's never bad to have like the second best at those positions either.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where they sort of, after their disappointing end to Season 1, then they went to Rogue, picked up these two French players, Soon and Unko, who are part of that very talented Rogue lineup. Also, the same lineup that was represented Team France at the Overwatch World Cup, if you were watching that. So they're a noted Tracer player, and Unko is considered, top 2 Western flex support alongside probably Chips Hyan on Dallas Fuel, now formerly of Envy. So these guys were like very clear pickups. So let's we can start with Soon. Let's start with Soon and the DPS players of the LA Valiant. Soon is a playmaking Tracer player, extremely skilled on that particular hero. Now, we did see him flexing in the preseason at time over to that Widowmaker, so we got to see a little more diversity than we've seen from him, I think, over the course of 2017, but his performance is still very good.
Yeah, Soon has always just been a monster on it. He had a little bit of a fall off here and there. I think between like DreamHack of last November and then when Rogue was doing very well, but then he had a couple like bad games. But a bad game on Rogue is like, one of them was going to have an off game once in a while, but it didn't matter because everyone else was so much more talented than the rest. What I like about his playstyle, and I think this comes from his Rogue days, and we'll see it around. We saw a little bit of it in the preseason, is he will just not give up an inch of that cart for free, and he's just blinking around, and it's the most frustrating frustrating thing in the world. And oftentimes you see a Reinhardt have to come back and just start swatting the fly swatter hammer at him and try to deal with him. But Soon will not give you an inch at all. And if he's the last one alive, he's going to use all his blinks and recalls to make that objective hell for you to get. And also, he's really good tracer, tracer. Although I think that's one part of his game he could improve on. Sometimes he can get body checked a little bit and gets a little tentative when the other tracer gets in his face. But I think he was definitely an upgrade for this team, because some of the questions coming in was, can Grimm's tracer play up to the level that it needs to? Because tracer has been a consistent part of the Overwatch metagame for 8 months, 10 months, forever.
Forever.
Forever. So you definitely need a top tier tracer just to start a team. And I think Soon was a perfect addition for this roster.
Yeah, and let's contrast him with Grim Reality, who is the tracer player that was successful previously on that Immortals roster, but has seen less success as of late. And I guess like my main issue with Grim Reality as a player is that he doesn't look to make plays. He always seems to be playing very passively, very defensively, and it's not that his mechanics are bad, it's just that he lacks the game sense to know when to strike at an opening when we look at a player like Soon instead.
I think a lot of that might come from where his hero pool started. And I mean, you talk about playing passive and playing defensively. Well, he was a McCree for a very long time. That's kind of what you're taught as a McCree, is play a little more defensively and try to stick back with your tanks and just use your mechanics to crush people. I think there still is a place for him on this roster, but I agree with you that he's not an exciting player, and oftentimes he's not even that consistent of a player. They've tried to move him to McCree and Soldier 76, but once he gets rattled a little bit and gets leapt on, it seems like he disappears from the rest of the game. And I'm going to talk about this when we talk about Silk Thread as well, but I think Grim right now would be best served trying to just specialize and maybe just going back to just being a McCree and hoping that there's maps or situations that they want a McCree more than they want a tracer, and then his tracer can be his fallback. Because I don't think he's ever going to overtake Soon's spot as the tracer on this roster, and I don't know what other heroes he can play. So I think he'd be best served trying to specialize, and whether that's on a McCree or who knows, maybe a Sombra, something along the lines of where no one else is playing it, just to get like more play time, I think would be the best route for him to stick on this team, because his McCree is very, very good. It's just McCree has not been a consistent, definitely part of the 6 starting roster kind of hero in a long time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have forgotten that when we saw him performing impressively on Immortals, after the roster just first formed, it was on that McCree that he was really turning up. And I agree that maybe it does fit his play style to play a little bit further back and play some more of those long-range hit scan heroes, as opposed to something that's so, you have to really press your advantage like a tracer or know exactly when to go in, which he seems to just struggle with as a player.
Yeah, and Tracer's definitely that snowball kind of hero that if you get your way into a good position, you're going to get 1 kill, 2 kill. Here's a pulse bomb, and I just won us the map. Whereas, yeah, I think McCree can be less stressful, but it also requires more babysitting, and in turn, you have to babysit the rest of your team. And so McCree so much fell out of favor when the dive comp came back in, but now with more tanks, you could see it. Look, he was a McCree player back when this team was called Soda Pop. I can't even remember exactly what they're called, but for a long time, he was, in my opinion, one of the initial Crusher 99 stories of a guy who just played really well, came out of nowhere, then became like kind of a superstar in the Overwatch tournament scene. So there is a place for him. I just think it's over on Tracer. His Tracer has never super impressed me. He ran it because they got a guy named Agilities who's got a god tier Genji, and Tracer Genji is the dive meta. So I think, and every time we've spoken to him or his teammates about him, he's taking it all very well, and he's trying to learn, and he's trying to get better, and he understands his spot on the team, and he's not crushed that he's not in the starting lineup anymore. But I think there will be a spot for him. I don't know exactly where that is, and I think he's probably in a similar situation with Silk Thread right now.
So you mentioned Silk Thread, and we did get to see more Silk Thread than we might see during the regular season. Because Agilities, the main Genji player on this team, was 17 years old for the preseason, so we weren't able to watch him play. He will be eligible by the time the regular season of the Overwatch League starts, but we got to have a very long look at Silk Thread and his Genji. Now, he did make some big plays with the Dragon Blade, and he did actually flex into quite a few other heroes. We've seen a little bit of him in the past coming from CLG, but you've been watching this guy for a while. What are your impressions of him?
I think Silk Thread he's a very good and capable Genji. I think he's actually a very good flex if they ever want to throw him on a flex tank. I think he would be capable of that as well, namely thinking of perhaps a Zarya for his play if they should so need it, because Envy has been, is good and bad. I know you were a little surprised how well Envy played
I was.
during the preseason. I think Silk is extremely versatile, but Silk I always kind of thought of as one of the hit skin DPS. I remember his Tracer being very good early on. I think I would give him the same advice I was talking to, would give Grim, that look, Silk, you're probably not going to be the starting Genji on this team, and for good reason, and he should understand that. Agilities has been crushing it on Genji for a very long time. Now, Agilities also plays a very serviceable Pharah, but I think Silk could probably take over that role and just take over that map to get some play times. Again, trying to specialize a little more. Yes, keep your Genji tight because you need it until Agility gets back, but maybe Silk can end up being the Pharah on this team. And I think Pharah is also a hero that's almost always going to be kind of in the meta, if not, 30% pick rate, at least on some control maps, or at least to bust it out and make a team switch. And then if they switch to deal with your Pharah, then he can go onto the Genji. So I think he's in a good spot there. I'm just happy he's in the Overwatch League. A very young guy for a while. He was one of the guys who climbed up the ladder, and all of these teams were going after him. All of these teams wanted him. And he's like, well, I might just go to college, And so, but then I guess he finally convinced his parents that this is a legitimate thing. Maybe he brought them to the Blizzard Arena and said, look, it's the old Tonight Show set. This is real. This actually happened. So I'm glad that he's in the league. I think he's going to be able to hold it down on DPS. This is actually really interesting. It just came to me that we are able to trade between rosters. And he would be a person that I think if he can show up on a huge Genji moments and then his team realizes like, look, we just aren't going to play you as much on Genji, he could be one of the first players traded in the Overwatch.
That's true. I mean, that's definitely true. And I at least appreciated how willing he was to show off some diverse picks during the preseason, because he sort of had to do everything. And I think that as we go into agilities next, if we do criticize this LA Valiant roster for one thing, it's that Soon's an excellent Tracer specialist. Agilities is an excellent Genji specialist. Grim Reality sort of also has been playing mostly Tracer these days. And so somebody has to step up and play some of these other fucking like DPS heroes in this game, right? So, if Silk Thread's going to be that guy, maybe he will see more playtime than we expect. So let's go on to agilities, though. Now, we know him, of course, from his stellar Genji play, as we've alluded to many times. He, in the past, has worked well with Fate, following Fate in. He does tend to, when he Dragon Blaze, he does tend to follow his tank line as opposed to initiating himself, which I think is a very good feature of a Genji player. It's a lot safer in those instances. So he does have some good synergy with his front line, and he's been putting on a show for a while.
Yeah, he really got unlocked when they brought in the Korean players, because we all knew he was good and he'd have moments where he'd pop off, but there were a lot of times that he had to start playing a little more passively with the previous roster because he just didn't trust that the support was going to be there, that his tank was going to be there to dive with him. And then as soon as you brought in Fate and Kareev, he knows like, I'm going to get the orb, I'm going to get the Ana healing, my Winston's going to be there, and then you saw the next level of agilities. But you are right, he doesn't play a lot of different things. Like I said, as far as okay, he'll run it on Oasis sometimes when they really needed it, but that was when they had lesser people on the roster, or less amount of people, not lesser people, maybe both on the roster.
Fewer.
Yeah, fewer, that's right.
You're the one with a writing degree.
Yeah, clearly not a speaking degree anyway. He also will play some of the Roadhog as well. And his Roadhog is actually kind of underrated, and we've seen a little bit of Roadhog come back into this. So I think Agilities is always going to be there on Genji. And Genji and Tracer are those heroes that even when they're bad, they're really good. And they've been that way for a while. So unless the team's really going to try to shut them down in a mega tank composition, maybe someone starts picking up a Reaper in this meta, something along those lines. But I think Agilities, he's going to play Genji until they really start to try to shut him down. And then if you do that, then one of these other guys is going to go nuts too. So I think he's in a fine spot. His Pharah is okay, but as long as Genji's in the meta, Agilities is going to be starting.
Well said. So let's move on to their main tanks. So Fate is the guy that we expect to see the most of. He's a Korean tank player. Didn't really have a huge amount of success. He played on a team called Mighty AOD in Korea, which was not really the greatest Korean team that we've ever seen in Apex, definitely on the lower end of the spectrum, but he made an immediate impact. He's a very aggressive Winston player, and as we've talked about, he really likes to be the primary initiator for this team. He likes to jump in first with his bubble and sort of make that call for everybody to follow in behind him.
And the mark of a great Winston for me is not only that initiation, but does he get out alive? So many Winstons can initiate. I mean, I can initiate as Winston. That's not that hard. It's a matter of getting out alive and being on the correct target as Winston. And he does such a great job of that. And it's really, you've seen him and Agilities grow together where they're in and he's getting all this cleave damage. I think the target calling and selection between those two has been so good. Look, Agilities gets all the credit when he gets like a single dash that kills 4 people. But you know why they're all at low health is they all been Tesla'd down by Fate, who got there 2 seconds beforehand. So the synergy that he works with Agilities is probably the core of this team. Soon can freelance a little bit more, which he likes to do on the Tracer anyway. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with Fate on the main tank. And he plays mostly just Winston. And that's fine because Winston's been good for a very long time. And I do like that they added Numlocked, who's going to be mostly a Rein player for this team probably, so that they can run a Rein and a Winston on certain maps if they want to. I think the flexibility that they've added on this roster is mostly comes in their tank line because the supports they brought in also are, they play the same thing either. But I think bringing in Numlocked with Fate is really good.
Yeah, Numlocked is a player who's been bouncing around from role to role for a while, was playing support, was on Energy, the team that became San Francisco Shock, and then switched over to a tank role. And he's been described as a very good shot caller, has good game awareness. But is he going to be the Reinhardt player on this roster, like you say? Because we haven't seen a lot of Fate's Reinhardt, so I'm not sure I know how good it is or if it's better than Numlocked. And for me, Numlocked is the player on this roster where I respect his play, but I don't really know what his role is going to be.
Yeah, I think it might be one of those situations too where you just want to bring in maybe another brain, and maybe you want to bring in, I mean, maybe this is the wrong way to look at it. Maybe you want to bring in an English-speaking tank player because their other tanks don't necessarily have the communication. So now maybe they're going to be able to see things differently. I think it's good to bring in a Reinhardt main to just come in, not necessarily to play Reinhardt, but just to tell the other tanks, like, this is how you would play, this is how just give the different perspective. So I think it's almost similar to, I mean, did Dallas really need Siegel? Probably not, but it's good to bring in that kind of mind for the game, which I think might be one of the reasons they're bringing in Numlocked. And also, if there's going to be like a triple tank meta, maybe there's situations where you're running a Rein and a Winston together in those odd situations. You used to see that on Control sometimes, actually, oddly enough. So with how things change, I think it's fine to just bring in the mind that he has and also the experience playing Reinhardt. I don't think Reinhardt will ever be completely out of the meta as long as King's Row is still in the map pool.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. In terms of flex supports, so we have Envy. So Envy is a player that we saw just spectacularly fail at times in contenders. He's a Korean player. I was really unimpressed with him, not just because, you could say, oh, well, what if there were language issues or communication issues that were causing things? He would just make incredibly poor decisions surrounding the use of his abilities or the use of his ultimates that seemed entirely random, that it could not have possibly been called out by a teammate or been a result of any misunderstanding. So I was really down on him. Now, that said, when we saw him in the preseason, he looked significantly improved. I was really impressed with a lot of his plays. He was topping out damage percent on his team. So he actually has had, I think, the biggest growth of any player that I've seen from contenders into the preseason. So I'm excited to watch him play more now.
I would tend to agree. I wonder if it's a situation, though, where the team understood that this is how Envy wants to play, so let's kind of support him a little bit. His team did look a little bit more aggressive in supporting him. Like, even on the D.Va, he would just be diving in. Well, D.Va's also just an assassin now.
Yeah, it's changed a lot, to be fair.
Don't let the HP confuse you. Definitely an assassin. But it fits his play style to be that much more aggressive, and I think the team gave him the support he needed. He was also hitting some really nice self-destructs. He won some fights all by himself. I think a lot of it, too, when Envy first came in Season 0, we tried to ask what his hero pool was, and they told us, oh, he's going to play Soldier 76 and D.Va. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, maybe because you can play the counter to the thing, and then, it was different. But his 76 was never that great, and his D.Va, it looked confusing. So maybe playing roles that are so very different from each other as far as what they want to accomplish probably hurt him, too. But he's a player that definitely won most improved from Contender Season 1 to preseason in my mind.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And they also have Space, who is a flex tank player who is not going to be eligible to play because he's only 17 up until halfway through the regular season. So What are your thoughts on Space generally? Because we haven't seen a lot of him. He was on some amateur teams like Arc Six. He was temporarily in contenders as stand-in on Cloud9, but it's been a little sporadic.
Well, I mean, Arc Six was a good team for a while. I'm gonna blank on it now, but they were named something else, and they changed their name at last second to Arc Six. So
You
they were
guys
definitely
get paid, right?
yeah, maybe yeah, that's right. It was a cool name, but then they changed it to Arc Six, and I had a long conversation with the
Or was
guy
it
who changed. I'm
Yikes?
like,
I'm trying to remember.
it might have been. Yeah, it could. Yeah, it was definitely Yikes.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. I told them it was a dumb name change, and now the fact that I can't remember what they used to be, I stand by it. Space, I've used the corny joke a lot. He does create space for his team. He was always a tank that's able to get in there, and I think he's a strong player. And if Envy falls off a little bit, now they have the fallback to go to Space. And Space is a decent roadhog. He's a good diva, and he can play a lot of things very well. And the fact that he gets to redshirt and just watch this team grow and kind of learn from the people in front of him, I think is going to be good. I would be actually surprised if when he comes in, he does not supplant whoever's playing in his spot on the roster. I do expect him, unless Envy continues at this level, I do expect him to take Envy's job.
I think it'll be a little tough to take Envy's job based on the improvement that we've seen. But yeah, I haven't watched Space play in a while either, so I'm definitely biased in terms of my recency of watching Envy play. So for supports, we have, first off, let's go with Kareev, who was the longer running of the flex supports on this team. Kareev came from the same team as Fate, so they're coming in off of Mighty AOD. They had this established synergy. Kareev was primarily like the Ana Zenyatta player during contenders, and now that we've seen the meta change and Unko be brought to this roster, he's now more into that Mercy role, like we saw him during the preseason. Seems a bit uncomfortable in that situation. I was not as impressed with his Mercy play as I was with, say, his Zen play that we saw in contenders.
I think neither of them really want to play Mercy, if I'm being honest about it.
I don't think any human being wants to play Mercy.
I think, yeah, that I would agree with that sentiment. But I think Kareev and Unko both understand that someone's going to have to play it, and I think they're both equally uncomfortable and or comfortable on it. I think they're both good enough game sense-wise. As two people who've been playing Zenyatta and Ana forever, they understand where people are going to come from, that they can pick up the Mercy and be adequate at it. I think they're both hoping that eventually the meta goes to Ana Zen, and then they're both just going to high five and be the happiest people on the planet, because you can put either on either and it doesn't matter. I mean, you talk about Kareev, anytime you talk to any of the other teams or players, they're like, well, yeah, Kareev is... Everyone has something great to say about him, and they all top each other. He is highly regarded. Then you have Unko, who we talked about how good Rogue was. There were a lot of people who considered Unko far and away the best player on that Rogue team, and that was a Rogue team with AKM and Soon and several other great players. So you've got a gluttony of talent at the Zenyatta position for them, and it's just right now it's tragic that you can't play Ana and Zen, and one of them is going to have to Mercy. I would imagine they're going to start switching off just to be like good to each other. They're both going to be in the starting roster. And yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of Kareev on Zen. And when Unko has to go Zen, you're not going to miss a beat. And they both play very similarly. And by that, I mean, they both hit all of their headshots and kill people all the time.
Yeah. I think the biggest difference when we look at who's going to be playing the Zenyatta between them, if the meta stays the same heading into the regular season, is where the synergy and the focus of that team lies. Because with Kareev, it's always been about Fate chasing down those Discord orbs. And when we saw Unko playing with Soon on this Valiant roster in the preseason, it was them combining for kills. So it was Unko picking out the targets with the Discord and Soon coming into the backline and trying to pick somebody off. So from when I was watching them and I saw Unko play the Zenyatta, it was more of like that support pick composition, whereas it was a big engage composition when Fate was going in after Kareev's orbs instead and trying to provide that frontline presence.
I think that's just a matter of comfort, because they've both played with each other for a longer period of time. Sure. It's just a style. And I think, that is actually something they need to erase, because otherwise it becomes predictable of like, oh, Kareev's on Zen, let's expect this. Oh, Unko's on Zen, someone finds Soon. So that needs to be kind of, washed into the melting pot of this squad right now.
And so we conclude with Verbo, who is a very young player, recently turned 18. He was the primary Lucio player of this team. There's been a lot of emphasis placed on his ability to shot call, his ability to understand strategy and make intelligent adjustments on the fly. But without a Lucio in the game right now, we didn't see much of him outside of some of these control maps during the preseason. And are we going to see him? Unfortunately, sort of like the third stringer behind two fantastic supports right now. So
Look, he's going to be the Lucio, but I'm not sure for how long. Also, has the coolest tattoo in all of Overwatch. You should look it up. Look, and also there was questions about his shot calling after season one. I think he got benched for a bit based on some of his shot calling, and I know there was some drama and some controversy over that. So I guess that he's going to be in there as long as people need a Lucio. But we talk about Lucio and control points being you have to run because of speed boost, but not necessarily. There's maps that I would much prefer a Mercy and a Zen. You talk about Oasis, and I think that's definitely coming into it where teams are like, do we really need to get to the point first? It doesn't even unlock. Mid fights aren't as big of a deal in this game as they have been in some others. So Lucio is definitely falling by the wayside a little bit, and that's really all Verbo is bringing to the table. Now, there is a world in which he starts grinding Mercy and becomes their Mercy main or something along those lines, or perhaps he tries to step into Moira. But all we really know of Verbo is that they relied on his shot calling, and there's been some issues around that. And he's a Lucio player. So his spot on this team is kind of limited at this point in time.
Yeah, he's sort of in the same boat in certain ways as Grim Reality is, where he's a little hyper specialized at the moment, and he needs to diversify or find a new angle. In terms of the coaching staff, they do have a coach named Ooks, who's a Korean coach who was brought over from Rhinos Gaming, another low to mid-tier team in Korean Overwatch, but has done well on Immortals. And then recently they pick up Cuddles, who's the British coach formerly of CLG. So they do seem to have some strength in the coaching staff. We saw immediate, when the Koreans came over, when Kriv and Fake came over, they came over with Ooks. And that was a pretty immediate improvement that we saw. But then, does he have the best control over that roster? They didn't dimensionalize their play for Contender Season 1, so that gave me some pause, and I think that's probably the reason why we saw the addition of Cuddles as well. But we're still waiting to read. But ever since Soon, Unko, and Cuddles have joined the team, now we're looking at a much more powerful squad.
It's a more powerful squad on paper, but it doesn't really diversify. I mean, you think about CLG, and CLG ran just like Pharaoh Mercy whenever they were CLG, and he brought over Silk Thread with him as well. Soon and Unko, as he said, like they had players who play those positions. I think bringing over Soon was more important than bringing over Unko, just based on what he plays and what he brings. But I still think it was just the smart move. If I was building a team and all of a sudden I see these rogue players come online, I don't even care what their hero pool is. These guys are very high-end players who have, who had success in the past, and that's kind of a mentality that you want to bring.
So with their results in the preseason, they did barely squeak by with a victory 3-2 against San Francisco Shock, which I thought they probably should have won a little bit more convincingly, but they came back a couple days later and they won very convincingly 3-1 against the Gladiators, the LA Gladiators. So this is a roster, when we look at all of the teams in the league, I think most people would say this is a top 6 playoff team.
I would tend to agree. They do need to kind of shore up Oasis, because losing 0-2 Oasis to the Gladiators is not.
That's a bad look.
Yeah, it's not a great sign, because the Gladiators didn't play all that well. But yeah, I think this is a team that you consider top 6, one of the definitely the best Western teams to look out for, and mostly just because a lot of these players aren't necessarily like North American Western players, right? You've got the guys from Rogue, and you've got these amazing Koreans that seem to have just blended into the roster. And I think any weaknesses that they had coming in, they've really kind of shored up. Their biggest weakness we talked about earlier is maybe they don't have someone to play like a Reaper, or maybe not the best Widow, but I think Soon can play a Widow just fine. So they don't really have weaknesses across the board. When you look at them, you say like, well, maybe they could upgrade here, but then just the pure talent they could throw out there as a 6-man, it's a frightening roster.
Yeah, I think also with more practice that they're going to be in a different set, like it's a different situation as well. They did pick up, Soon and Unko relatively late, so they don't have the most synergy yet. So I'm excited to see what they can do. But they looked better the longer the preseason went on. I think we can say they looked more decisive in their second match versus their first match. So I think this is probably going to be a top 6 team. They'll have more weapons when Space is going to come of age later in the season. And I think we'll probably expect the playoffs from these guys.
I would agree. And just, to give people hope who are big fans of Rogue, if they happen to need a Soldier 76 specialist, I think they know
right. Let's go pick up that AKM partway through the season if they have to have it. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. This has been the Overwatch League team preview with myself and Hexagrams for the Los Angeles Valiant.